somebody changed something in the Matrix or something. It was so weird. Hello everybody and welcome back in front of the red sofa. It's time for a Sunday story time here on the very unofficial travel guides. Today I'm going to tell you the story about when I passed out on a plane. And as always, before I tell you that, I'm going to talk about something else. I just want to say I think it's kind of interesting. Yesterday, so Saturday, I posted on my Facebook 3 ideas I had for what story time I wanted to tell today, and they were what it's like to be a Disney character parade performer, the time that God spoke to me on vacation, true story, I'll tell it eventually, and the time I passed out on a plane. And definitely the one that got the most votes was people wanted to hear about the time I passed out on a plane. So I think it's kind of interesting that what you guys are most interested in hearing is me being in embarrassing situations. But I can understand. I like to hear about that stuff too. Oh, I could tell you so many embarrassing stories, but none of them are travel related, or maybe I could come up with some. Anyways, today I want to tell you about the time I passed out on a plane. And in order to tell you that, I have to back way up in the story, so there's like an explanation of what I think happened. It was at least 20 years ago. At least 20 years ago, I was in my very young 20s, and I was living in New York City at the time, and I was in a show, and we all had 3 days off over Christmas. And of course, I wanted to fly home, so I flew home, I don't remember, let's say on Wednesday. Thursday was then like Christmas Eve, and Friday night I had to fly back to New York because Saturday we had shows. That's how I remember it. So it was really quick, just like see as much family as possible, do as much Christmassy things as possible, and then go back to New York. And at the time, I want to say it was my second year living in New York. Yeah, it must have been. And I think I talked about this in some other video, I really didn't like living in New York. When I first moved there, it was a big, exciting adventure, and then when I left to move to Germany, I just hated it there. That's the video I talked about it in, is why I left the United States and moved to Germany. So if you want to hear more about that, look for that video in the Sunday Storytime playlist. All right, so on the evening of the night that I was flying back to New York, I was invited over to my great aunt Aggie's house, the same Aunt Aggie who lent me $500 when I moved to Germany, which is also in that other video I was talking about. And she invited my mom and I over to her house for a little like going away dinner, and it was so sweet. And she made, Aunt Aggie has is from the Polish side of my family, so she made pierogi, and she made a couple other things, and she had a bottle of white wine. And this was way back in the time where I really didn't drink a lot of alcohol at all. I mean, compared to back then, I drink much more now, but back then, compared to other like 22-year-olds I knew, I drank, you know, basically nothing. Anyways, Aggie had this nice bottle of white wine, and I had at least 1 glass of white wine at dinner. So I was already a little bit tipsy, because you have to think, you know, this is 22-year-old Morgan. I probably weighed like 100 pounds because I was just all skin and bones back then and just not used to drinking any alcohol. Then something really stressful happened. An aunt of mine had, at the time, a little girl. I want to say, geez, she must have been like around 3 or 4. And that aunt called and said, we're in the emergency room. This daughter, I'm not going to say the names, stopped breathing, and please come, I need your help. And so, of course, we all jumped in the car on the day after Christmas, so it was like the 26th, and drove like crazy to get to the emergency room. And then my little cousin was there, and she's hooked up to these tubes and everything, but everything was fine. And but that was, of course, very, very stressful. And we were all just like, You know how you get like so much adrenaline, and then when it starts leaving you, it's like you feel like you just had a workout or something, like you ran a marathon, and then I felt like exhausted. And I didn't have any way to get to the airport because I couldn't drive myself, because then I was, you know, the car, where would I, you know, what would I do with the car and the keys? It was my mom's car. And so I think for the first time ever in Minnesota, I took a taxi. And, you know, if you live in a city like Chicago or New York or something, it might seem strange that that it seems strange to take a taxi. But just in Minnesota, I don't know, you just don't take taxis. At least I didn't. And so for the first time ever, I took a taxi from the hospital that we were in all the way across town to the airport. And for some reason, that was also very stressful to me. And I'm sure it cost tons of money. I don't remember exactly. All right, make it to the airport, check in, and very close to the time that my flight is leaving, then I get on the plane, and I'm like, okay, good. What a, you know, stressful last couple of hours, but this all worked out. And then they come around, and this was back at the time where also on domestic flights, you could order like a beer or wine or something, and it was included in the price of the flight. Of course, things are way different now, at least on the American Airlines. And even though at that time, like I said, I very rarely drank alcohol, for whatever reason, it seemed like a good idea to order another white wine. So I drank this wine on the flight back to New York, and by the time I had finished it, I mean, what is it, how many hours is it from Minnesota to New York? It's probably like, what, 2.5 hours? 3 hours at the most? Let's say it's around 3 hours. So over the course of these, probably the first hour and a half, I drank this glass of wine, and I was out like a light, like totally asleep. And I was alone in my row. So I was probably sitting in the middle of the row or at the window, I don't know. It's important for later. And I had put all the armrests up so I could, like, you know, lay down on the seats. Oh, what a luxury that is when that happens, right? And to be as small as I am to make that work out. Yeah, so let's skip ahead to the landing. So here's young, drunk Morgan, passed out, like from drinking too much and just having so much stress and just being like overwhelmed, sleeping in this row of an airplane. And I was so deep asleep that I didn't even notice that we had landed. And this is how I remember then the events, the next minute or so. Somebody tugging on my pants and me waking up, and you know those moments where, like, if you're sleeping in a hotel room or like at a friend's house or something, I think everybody's had this, where you wake up and you have no idea where you are. And it's like this weird, you know, like 5 seconds of figuring out where you are and what's going on. And then when you realize where you are, you're like, oh yeah, that's right, I'm not at home, I'm at, you know, Jenny's house or whatever. So I had one of those moments, and the person who tugged on my leg was like, dude, time to wake up, we've landed. And I was like, oh, really? Okay. And for whatever reason, I was so embarrassed. And so I stood up as fast as I could, because it, like, you know, all the row of people who were getting out, they were all looking at me, and it was embarrassing. So I stood up as fast as I could, and I remember reaching up to get my backpack out of the overhead thing. And then the next thing I remember is being back on that row of seats, laying down, and then having people looking over the seats at me. Like, you know, before that happened, they were all in the aisle to get out. And then when I opened my eyes again, then there were people like looking over the back of the seats. And there was this woman, I remember her looking down and being like, "Hey, are you okay?" And me being like, yeah, why?" And she was like, "Because it kind of looks like you just passed out. What's going on?" And I was so confused because it was like, it just was so confusing because I knew that I had woken up in this position and I had stood up once, and then all of a sudden I was back in that position again, and there were so many things happening in my head. And I think anybody who's ever like, you know, gone unconscious, you know, like had a fainting spell or anything, I'm sure you can relate, right? When you come to your senses again, first of all, you like have no idea what's going on and how you got there. And the fact that like I had woke up in that position, stood up, and then woke up in the position again, it was like somebody changed something in the Matrix or something. It was so weird. And the woman was like, she's like, "Well, why don't you just lay there for a second and sit up slowly this time?" And so I was trying to tell her, "I'm fine. I'm just really tired. It was a really stressful day." And she's like, "Well, you know, but you're not in a hurry. We're still all getting off. Just, you know, just wait for a minute." And the flight attendant came over and was like, "Is everything okay here?" And she brought me a glass of like cold ice water. And I was like, "Yeah, I'm fine. I'm sleepy." Because I had never like passed out before and I didn't know what was going on. I mean, it's not like you learn about what to do in that situation when you're in school, you know, what to do if you think you passed out. And then, I mean, I guess that's the story right there. Because then eventually you know, I drank this cold glass of water, the flight attendant stayed by me until the last person was, you know, like passed. And then she's like, "Are you feeling all right now? Should I help you out?" And I was like, "I'm fine." And I stood up and grabbed my backpack and I went, and then it was all cool. But yeah, I've heard from several other people stories about people passing out in planes. And I think one thing that you really always need to remember is that the air in planes is super dry. And if you're already really dehydrated and you go into a drier environment, that's not going to do anything good for you. And I think that's probably, or I remember reading someplace that that's one of the main reasons that people who are normally very healthy have like fainting spells, and it's due to extreme dehydration. So, you know, like, first of all, it was the middle of winter, and if you don't know, the middle of winter in Minnesota fucking sucks. It is so cold and miserable there sometimes, and it's so cold that it's like being in the desert because every drop of moisture in the air is frozen. So people in the winter in Minnesota get dehydrated just because there's no moisture in the air, and if you're not drinking gallons of water every day, then it just happens. And I'm sure that that was happening to me. And then add to the top of it, drinking 2 glasses of wine when I usually don't drink anything, and being a very petitely built young man, it just all added up. And I'm positive that that is what happened. So anyways, I was just trying to say, remember, drink a lot of water, especially in the winter, and especially if you're flying in a plane. And that's my story. I've got really a lot of stories. I always keep on coming up with new ideas, new stories that I could tell, and every time that I make one of these videos and look at your comments, I think, oh yeah, I could tell a story about the time that I did this or that happened to me or whatever. So those other 2 stories that I mentioned yesterday, the time that God talked to me on a vacation and what it's like to be a Disney character, I will be doing those story times as well. I don't know if I'll end up doing it next weekend or the weekend after that or whenever, because this sitting down here like this and talking to you guys is one of the things now that I look forward to the most in my week. And if between now and then I get another like flash idea of something that would be a really good story time, I'll probably do that first, just because then it's like, oh yes, this is gonna be fun. So that's kind of how I decide which story I'm gonna tell, I guess. And I like to ask you guys for input as well. So between now and next weekend though, I'm gonna be posting more videos from my recent cruise on the Norwegian Epic, including an explanation video of some interesting videos that will be coming up soon. Let's say that. And I hope that you guys come back and subscribe to my channel here. If you haven't, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And a very special thanks to all the people who support me on Patreon. I posted a special video that I made just for my followers on Patreon on my page recently. And it's like, I think it's like 10 minutes of me just unpacking and chatting and talking about the cabin and all that. So if you're interested in seeing that, go over to patreon.com/veryunofficial, and I look forward to seeing you guys back here soon. Bye.